Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, back from a break. And prior to the break, I had showed you a couple of reels that were on my list to go work on. And one of them I'll do today is the Silstar. It's the reel everybody loves to hate, or even acknowledge that maybe they owned one at one point. And that's probably because it has a lot of quality issues over time. And I don't know if that's hereditary or if it's environmental, the old, what caused the problem, right? Is it the genetics, or is it the way they're used or what they're designed for? And Silstar, this is a more modern one, and this one I believe was made in the early 2000s. It was part of a bring-back attempt on a company that went out of business. I believe it was a European distribution primarily. And they just made them for bait and tackle shops and department stores and the like to give a low-end entry point reel. And that's kind of what their reputation has been. Their reputation, unfortunately, below the entry level is that they don't last, right? And I don't know if they don't last because people don't take care of them. Maybe that's because these are bought as the first reel and just fished and folks don't know how to take care of them, or if it's quality of the parts and used in the manufacturer. And here's two. This is the identical reel to this one without the spool, and relatively new reel. Doesn't work. It goes 2 or 3 rotations and stops, right? Here's another one with the graphite case. Very, very difficult to turn. We can see corrosion on the metal piece. There's rust on the internal part of the handle there. So it's kind of saying it's steel. And poor quality of materials there. We'll make a second video on why these reels failed, but today I just thought I would take you through the Silstar. In this case, it's the Fish Bonz reel. It's a 70 size. Again, it was probably made in the early 2000s. The notion of this reel, probably eye-catching, probably wound up in a department store or some other low entry point place for selling reels. Looks nice enough. Probably that's what they were depending on in order to catch your attention. And let's take it apart and find out. So I'm taking the spool off first. And for those of you that don't watch my videos or don't watch them frequently enough, you'll notice I have a plastic glove on my non-working hand. That's to keep the oils and contaminants off of this hand as best I can. And I also use a parts bucket for all my pieces and parts. Now this reel, when I previewed it, did not have the side button. I found one that fit, so I just did that before we started this. And what I like to do when I take a handle off is to go ahead and put this back on so that I don't lose that button in transition. And as we're opening this up, I'm just noticing this reel was made in Korea. So whether it was for European distribution or what it may be, I'm not quite sure. But the reel itself spins, so let's go find out what the technology is. Now on low price reels, you don't expect to find leading edge technology. You expect to find something that's going to last. It's going to be for the occasional fisherman, fisher person. It's going to be a reel that probably used for a vacation home, a cottage. It's not going to be your daily fishing reel. It's going to be used generally by a novice. It's probably going to cost under $30 US. And if it's properly maintained, if it's washed down after it's used, if it's oiled on a regular basis, should last for what it's intended to do. And then if you find that you like the sport and you want to move up, then you can go for additional upgrades. But what I'm expecting to see in here right now is bushings, not bearings. This seems to be a basic case. We have the 4 side plate screws that I'm taking out now. You'll notice that the side plate stops here, which means that it is a half side plate, and as such you can take the side plate off to expose the gearing without taking the rotor off. We'll take the rotor off anyway, but you don't have to do that in order to access and do some basic maintenance on this reel. And I'm just noticing as I'm putting them in the box that all of those side plate screws are the same. You want to check that on the reels that you work on, because sometimes there's different sizes based on what the case dimensions are, and putting the short screw back in the long hole or the long screw back in the short hole just isn't going to work. I'm just using a little razor knife here to separate the case. And we can see underneath, this is basic reel design. So we have a main gear and a plastic bushing. That's kind of an indication of lower cost. Some of the ones like the Pen 105, which use the bushings on the side, use brass bushings. These are plastic, so they will wear more. And what I tell folks as I do these reels is take pictures along the way so that you know how to go back and put these in place. This one came out, and it has tabs. You'll see that there's tab inserts on here, and you need to put the tabs back into the side plate to seat it properly. If you don't, the side plate won't close. So there we go. We just put that aside. This one has a basic reel design that you'll find on many modern reels. It has a main gear, crosswind block, crosswind gear, pinion gear. What you'll see underneath, though, is these are not brass parts. These are all machined, I call it pot metal. I'm not quite sure what the actual metal is on this one, but that's probably one of the reasons why these reels fail. And when we open it up, we'll go see on those two failed reels in another video why this particular model failed of that. So we have a main gear then, which can now come out, and it pulled the bearing out with it. We have this is an interesting one. We have the main gear with a little clip on the back of it. I'll show you how to reinstall that. I haven't seen this reel, but there's a clip on the back here, this wire clip, and it looks like a U. I'm not sure if that's showing up very well, but there's a U on the back of this main gear, and that sets inside this lever here in order to actuate the anti-reverse. And then this is the anti-reverse hold down. If you want to override, you pull it down. If you want to let it function properly, you move it up. And here's, again, this is that pot metal or basic metal for a pinion gear as opposed to a brass gear. And I'm going to guess that on this other reel that we take apart, we'll probably see some rusting, some corrosion, or some other thing like that is causing the problem there. But I'll do that in the second video. All right, I'm just going to pull this crosswind gear off by grabbing the stud. Use little pliers for that. Plastic case underneath it, no bearings, no oil or lubrication. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab some blue grease. I use a Pen Reels Precision reel grease. I recommend that if you go and use your fishing reels and are doing your own maintenance on them, to get reel grease and oils that are designed for fishing reels as opposed to general purpose oils. The general purpose oils are not designed for fishing reels, and they do wear out easier and evaporate or do other things that kind of compromise the effort that you put into this to repair. Putting some lubrication into the channel of the crosswind block, and that'll help the crosswind block go up easier. Okay, those two are reset, but let's go up top now. Take a look at this rotor. I expect to find a bushing up here, not a bearing. And just want to make sure everything's sound. Again, this is half education here. It's just let's go find out how this particular reel is made. And again, I want to find out why these reels fail as much as they do, because there's certainly a pile of them that I have that have failed. The other thing with this reel is because of the price point entry, it's a very low cost reel. You never see them come in for service. Probably the service alone would cost more than the reel is worth to just go buy a new one. So a lot of times these are viewed as disposable. Here's an example of that. I got a nut on here. You can use a ratchet on this one. There's a little counterweight block here to offset the weight of the bale and keep this reel stable. And then, unfortunately, it's tough to grab that nut. If you want, you can go ahead and use a ratchet on that. All right, with that set nut off, we can pull the spool, the rotor up, and we have a bearing in here. So we have a sealed bearing in here. It's held on by 3 of the screws. If you wanted to work that bearing, you could take the 3 screws out, pull a shaft. There's no reason to pull a shaft. It's hard enough finding information on this company. I imagine that parts are not available. All right, so now that we know what we're working on, I'm just going to put some blue grease on the pinion gear below. And a lot of folks will say, well, why are you even spending a lot of time on this? What are you going to do with this reel anyway? And chances are I'll give it to a local Boy Scout operation or something that's holding a little merit badge, or teaching kids how to fish or something like that. It's perfect for an entry-level reel. Again, it's not going to be something you're going to use every day, but it is something that will fish and catch fish and teach you how to fish, and those are all good things. Okay, a little blue grease on the back. I'm checking the teeth here to make sure they're all together, and they are. Checking this side of it to make sure that there's no abnormal wear. That's okay. Same thing here, checking the teeth on the back end, which powers that crosswind gear, which is seated in the back here. And that crosswind gear pushes the spool up and down. Okay, remember that little U-clip here? The little U-clip needs to line with the slot here in order to make that work properly. And you can do that by looking through the side plate, getting that lined up, and there you go, that's set properly. So sometimes, interestingly enough, you'll find a main gear that has a hole in it. And everybody always wonders, why is that hole in the main gear? Same idea. You've got a pin on the back of it. Usually it's like a letter L upside down, or the number 7. And you have to line that with a little hole in the assembly to make sure that works. This one looks fine from a structural standpoint. So we're going to go ahead and put this back on. While we got it, I'm holding the main gear and assembly in place. This lock nut came here. And again, if you didn't know that, if you were in haste and just taking pieces and parts off and throwing them into your parts tray, and then you wind up stuck trying to figure out where did this piece come from, that's the idea behind taking pictures as you go along. And it's very helpful to do that. I'm not sure there's a schematic available on this reel. I really didn't check. I probably should have done my homework. But if there was a schematic, that would also tell you where the piece or part came from. But in most cases, like I said, this reel is kind of viewed as a disposable reel, where folks just use them, unfortunately maybe abuse them, or just aren't aware of the way that these should be properly maintained, and then they just kind of go away. All right, I'm putting the set screw back in now. The set screw belongs here to hold that nut so that it doesn't shake free in rotation, which it's apt to do. And I'm just having my normal trouble with small pieces and parts, so just bear with me. I should be able to do it now. There we go. So that one, yeah, when you're rotating a reel this way, and that's a cross thread that comes that way, it has a tendency to shake out. You'll find most of the reels that you take apart have some kind of set relationship there to go do that. All right, with that in place, then we're going to go put the crosswind shaft back in place. Might as well put a light coating of reel grease on there. It doesn't need a lot, just enough to help it move through that bearing. That bearing was sealed, so I'm not going to put any lube in there, but it's nice to know that at least it has a ball bearing in it. I fully expected to see a bushing up top. Okay, so now we've got the little set screw that belongs in the crosswind block. Crosswind blocks, easy enough, are a place where a lot of people make errors in reassembly. They don't pay attention to how it came out, and sometimes these get turned upside down, and in that case they won't work. With that done then, I put a little blue grease on the shaft here earlier. This is a plastic bushing, so it really doesn't need much in terms of lubrication, but we'll snap that case back on. I'm going to hold it and give it a spin right now, and you know what? It's spinning nicely. So it's not necessarily just poor design that causes problems in these reels. I think a lot of it we're going to find is, we've got some kind of metal in there. It's not brass for sure. It doesn't look very corrosion resistant. And I think what we're going to find as we go through the reel that broke, either one of them, is that those have corroded because somebody didn't oil them, didn't take the 10 minutes or so just to take this side plate off and just give it a good squirt of oil or a little bit of blue grease. They don't have to go as extensive as I did in taking every piece and part out of this thing, but typically that's what we find. We find somebody grabbed it, they were going to use it on vacation or holiday or whatever, took it fishing, probably left it in the bottom of the boat or took it and just put it in the back of the cabin or garage or wherever they store their reels, and the water just remained there and the dirt and the grime, and it just ate away at the gearing. So that's the conversation here. Is it the making of the reel and how it was designed? This one's spinning nicely. Or is it the way that people have cared for? And unfortunately, it's a confluence there. It's a low-end reel that folks a lot of times do not know how to take care of, and they don't. All right, I'm pulling the drag stack out to see what we got here. So we have felt drags in here. Nothing wrong with felt drags. Those are used throughout the industry. Penn Fierce has felt drags. So felt drags require oil, and I'm using a Reel X, which is an aftermarket fishing reel oil. And quite honestly, there's a lot of oil already on these, but I'm putting them on there just to show you. And for whoever gets this reel in the future, it's already completely serviced. When you look at the drags, there's always a drag, or almost always a drag, that has ears or keys on it in the set. Most of the sets, this is a typical set, have the 6 washers. This always belongs in the middle. So it starts with a drag washer, and then it goes to a metal washer, a drag washer, and then the keyed washer, the last drag washer, and then the top one is round but not keyed. And this is a spring clip. Most of the time you'll find spring clips in these types of designs for spinning reels. That one gets inserted, and I always like to keep my finger on there because these things are springs and they will shoot, and then you'll have an oops moment. Okay, that's completely serviced there. So let's go ahead and put that on, put the drag knob on. And I guess this one found its way to the table because somebody pulled a button off of it, and I found a aftermarket replacement. You can find them in bait and tackle stores. You can find them online, eBay or something. They're not very expensive. Apparently it's something that happens a lot in terms of having these things lost. Even that the one that I showed you, the second one that we will work on here in terms of why did this wheel fail, is also missing the button on the back. So I don't know if that's like jacks in used cars where for some reason somebody wanted to keep the jack even though they sold the car, and you got to go run around and find a replacement tire jack, but whatever. Okay, so that's on, and you know what? It's no better, no worse than any other entry-level reel in the under $30 bracket. And again, I haven't bought one of these, but that's the Silstar reel, made in Korea. This one happens to be the Fish Bonz, and for an entry-level reel for an occasional use, put some line on it, take it fishing. It's a decent project there. So we're just checking out to make sure that I had that anti-reverse set right with that little loop that goes in that toggle, and this is the switch that activates the toggle, and it works fine. So there you go, Silstar Fish Bonz, and a little bit of the history of the company and a little bit of a look inside of what is basically an entry-level reel. And next video I do, we'll take it apart and find out why the other one failed. So with that, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please indicate that on YouTube. If you want to see more, please subscribe.